Good afternoon, everyone, and welcome. Bonjour à toutes et tous. Je vous souhaite la bienvenue à la première session de la série de webinaires. Demystifier l'approvisionnement et diversifier les chaînes logistiques. Ce webinaire se déroule en anglais. Cependant, une traduction en français est mise à votre disposition. Veuillez sélectionner le bouton Interprétation en bas à droite à votre écran et choisir l'option français. Nous vous invitons également à poser vos questions aux panélistes directement en français. Thank you everyone for joining us this afternoon as we launch the new WEKH procurement series, Demystifying Procurement and Diversifying the Supply Chain. The goal of the series is to raise awareness about procurement and introduce you to specific terminology, initiatives, tools, and resources that are available to assist and enhance your knowledge and understanding of what is a very complex and complicated topic. For anyone wishing to listen to a live French translation, please select the interpretation button at the bottom right of your screen and choose the French option. I'm Alison Campbell. My pronouns are she, her, elle, and I'm delighted to be your host and moderator for this session. I'm a visiting researcher at the Diversity Institute, which houses the Women Entrepreneurship Knowledge Hub. While we meet today on a virtual platform, I'd like to begin by acknowledging the Indigenous peoples of all the lands that we are on today. We do this to reaffirm our commitment and responsibility in improving relationships between nations and to improve our own understanding of local Indigenous peoples and their cultures. As I'm joining you from Ottawa today, I acknowledge the traditional territory of the Algonquin and Anishinaabe people, who are the traditional guardians of this land. We acknowledge their longstanding relationship with this territory, which remains unceded. We recognize the traditional knowledge keepers, both young and old, and we honor their courageous leaders, past, present, and future. I encourage everyone to share in the chat where you're participating from today. In addition, we're looking forward to hosting a webinar later in the series that highlights opportunities specifically for Indigenous entrepreneurs, and I hope you'll join us then. For those of you who are not familiar, the Women Entrepreneurship Hub, or WEKH as we call it, works across the country through 10 regional hubs, both in English and in French, to share research on and resources for women entrepreneurs in Canada. Drawing on the expertise of a network that includes more than 250 organizations, we also host and support programming that highlights opportunities and best practices for women entrepreneurs and the organizations that support them, similar to this series. Governments and corporates are amongst the largest buyers of goods and services in Canada. Yet the procurement processes behind these sales are not well understood and are often not even on the radar screens of women and diverse entrepreneurs. Today, we'll be hearing about what supplier diversity is, the role of supply councils in Canada, and the benefit of supplier diversity program for both the buyers and suppliers. We will also talk about certification and why diverse businesses might want to consider becoming a certified supplier. Setting the stage for us now on supplier diversity, I'm pleased to introduce Dr. Wendy Souquier with a look at the latest research on women entrepreneurs in Canada. Dr. Souquier is the founder of the Diversity Institute and research lead of the Future Skills Center. She also leads the Women Entrepreneurship Knowledge Hub, funded by the Government of Canada, which promotes the inclusive supports for women and other diverse entrepreneurs. Wendy is one of Canada's leading experts in entrepreneurship, disruptive technologies, innovation processes, and diversity inclusion. Welcome, Wendy.
Thanks so much, Alison, and thanks very, very much for all your work in pulling this together along with the rest of the team. So I'm happy to have an opportunity to just provide a quick overview to sort of level set. As some of you know, we've been working on issues around diversity and procurement for over a decade. And we consider it to be one of the most important levers available to drive an inclusive innovation ecosystem. So I'm just going to, and I know many of the people at a quick glance at who's enrolled, and I know there are many people who know far more about this than I do, but I wanted to just provide a little bit of a context for the concepts, what we consider to be the business case, where we seem to be, although we're in the process of doing more research to get a better sense of policies and practices, and what we recommend as the way forward. So, the definition of diverse supplier varies, and there's been some controversy about what a diverse supplier is, but generally in Canada, we're referring to companies that are owned or controlled by a minimum of 51% women. In the case of women-owned businesses, or increasingly people are looking at women and non-binary people, Indigenous people, racialized people, Black people, persons with disabilities, LGBTQ2S+. But the notion is it's majority owned. It's not 1 in 5 board members. The notion of supplier diversity, which goes by a lot of different names, is really organizations, whether government or for-profit, prioritizing a portion of their spend being allocated to one of these groups or a combination thereof. And I will say that I think the supplier diversity and social benefit processes are probably more advanced in some respects in the US than they are in Canada. And in fact, you'll see a lot of the companies that have implemented these programs are subsidiaries of large American corporations. The notion of inclusive procurement is the process not just of setting targets or standards for diverse suppliers, but also finding ways to ensure that they can actually participate. And we'll talk more about this, but one of the big challenges we have seen in recent years is many organizations set targets that diverse suppliers, but have processes diverse suppliers can't actually participate in. So in our view, an inclusive procurement approach means that you're not only setting those targets and set-asides, but you're making sure that diverse suppliers can participate in your supply chain. We've also seen examples of processes that are targeting social enterprises, or the notion of social procurement, especially in government kinds of programs, where procurement is used not just to benefit individual diverse employers or diverse entrepreneurs, but it's actually designed to benefit whole communities. And we often see that with infrastructure programs, both in Canada and abroad. And it's important, I think, to also understand that there are opportunities not just to provide services directly to government or large corporations, but also to work with tier 1 suppliers. So in some instances, especially with very big contracts, multi-million-dollar, even billion-dollar contracts, sometimes the customer will specify that the tier 1 supplier, the big company that they're dealing with, must engage diverse suppliers at the tier 2 level. And that's a very effective way to move things forward. Why do we care? Because lots of businesses in Canada are diverse. And even if we look just at SMEs, and those of you who've heard me speak before know that I have a problem with defining entrepreneurship as SMEs. I actually think we have to find ways to include entrepreneurs who are self-employed. That's another discussion. But if we look at SMEs, 16% of them are owned by women, 12% are owned by racialized people, over 1% are owned by Indigenous people, and about 0.5% that we know about are owned by persons living with disabilities. You add that together, and it suggests that when we're looking at the SME community in particular, at least 20% plus or minus consists of women-led or diverse SMEs. And when we look at the benefits for large corporations, there's been lots of research on this, which parallels the business case that's been done for other applications of an EDI lens, but really it allows for improved innovation in the supply chain. Some would argue that having more and more diverse suppliers reduces your dependence on a particular supplier and therefore reduces risks. Others, of course, argue that no one got fired for buying IBM and you know, see the idea of consolidation and single vendor suppliers as being less risky. That's something we can talk about more. The ability to respond to consumer needs. This is particularly true when we look at retail, for example. When you think about a market like Toronto, where half the population was born outside the country, half the population is racialized, and of course, half the population is women. If you don't have suppliers who can produce products that people want to consume, hair products, skin products, clothes, etc., you're going to be missing out on half the market. And that creates real opportunities for diverse suppliers. And increasingly, we're seeing consumers generally and stakeholders, shareholders, and so on, expecting companies to put their money where their mouth is. And, you know, certainly when we do diversity and inclusion strategies for large organizations, we're not just looking at their HR stats or their targets for leadership and their boards. We're asking very pointed questions about their supplier diversity programs. And why we care about this is not just because it's good for diverse SMEs and it's good for the customers, it's also good for the economy. And there's lots of evidence that has suggested that investing in women and diverse SMEs and entrepreneurs can really drive growth in the economy. And we know COVID has hit women-owned businesses, Black-owned businesses, and other businesses owned by diverse people much harder than others. I mean, one study that the Black Business Professional Association did, where they compared responses of their members to responses of the Canadian Federation of Independent Business, showed that Black businesses were twice as hard hit by COVID in terms of layoffs, loss of sales, risk of closure, half as likely to get access to government programs. So when we talk about rebuilding better, procurement, without question, is one of the strategic levers. And yet when we look at practices, you see that even among the large corporations, which are, you know, the best diversity employers and like to sing a song around diversity, only about 40% of them have formal supplier diversity programs. And even those that do often apply them very inconsistently. We see the same thing in government. I mean, I've bid on government contracts for agencies that allegedly have a supplier diversity process in place, but they're not asking you the questions when you're filling in the RFP. On the other hand, some are very, very rigorous. So we see real gaps between intention and implementation. We also know that tracking is uneven, and that means that it's harder to evaluate impacts and benchmark and so on. And we also know that a lot of organizations are worried about the impact that this will have on their reputation because they don't know how to ask the questions. Even a large, you know, we're in a conversation with the women, whatever it is, WEKH, the women's ministry in the federal government. They did not want to ask questions about the diversity of their suppliers because they were afraid that they were violating some principles. So we have to really work on ensuring that people understand how this works, what you can do, what you can ask, what you can't ask, how you can embed it into your adjudication processes. and also recognize the expectations are going to be growing. So we're seeing the government applying this not just to procurement, but also grants that they're giving out for economic development and innovation. And we expect the 50-30 challenge is going to ratchet up the stakes. So there are lots of private corporations. This is by no means a comprehensive list that have formal programs. And if people want, kind of an inventory of a few examples to look at, we've got lots of them. We know, though, that a lot of the current supplier diversity programs don't address the full range of diverse people. So most of them target women. Some are starting to look at Indigenous people, racialized people. We even see some emerging that focus specifically on Black people. Persons with disabilities, far less likely to be included, and LGBTQ2S+, even less so. In Canada, we're seeing lots of large organizations, some of them subsidiaries, as I mentioned, of US corporations. We're seeing governments apply a supplier diversity lens, although again, it's often uneven. But the level of the commitments is often relatively small. So a lot of them are talking about 5%, which is not significant when you consider how important these suppliers are among SMEs in Canada. And a lot of organizations say they have programs, but they don't really track or evaluate. So the barriers from our perspective, which I know the the diversity councils are doing a lot of work on, is the lack of awareness and understanding of the benefits, the need for leadership, the need for more coordination. It's an additional step. It requires different expertise. You have to train people. You have to know how to go about doing it. And having talked to a lot of folks in procurement, it's not always front of mind. So there are a lot of things from an implementation perspective that we have to look at. And kudos to the federal government. They're increasingly putting energy into targeted programs, and even more importantly, into programs to help develop capacity in organizations to do business with them. I say this as a veteran of a lot of large government procurement processes, and often they are designed, it seems, to reward good proposal writing rather than necessarily good products and services. And often the standards that they're applying, even to a $100,000 contract, are not a lot different than the ones that they're applying to the $100 million contracts. So you need proportionality as well in terms of your processes in order to make them more accessible to diverse groups. So when we're talking to purchasers, whether they're for-profit or private or government, we talk about looking at where the opportunities are, setting benchmarks, developing the appropriate policies and procedures, and making sure your staff actually know what those policies and procedures are, having dedicated resources to drive the program, making sure there are metrics and there are annual reviews, making sure you've got a really good process for outreach and engagement with communities of interest, either directly or through the supplier councils. Because one of the things we often see is that people say, well, it's an open process and none of them applied. But none of them may have applied because they're not part of your usual networks, or the thresholds that have been set for the projects are such that they couldn't apply. So you really need a very strategic approach to the building capacity piece. We know as well, diverse entrepreneurs often don't know about these opportunities, or often find them overwhelming, look at an RFP and think, way too hard, way too complicated, way too much time. I'll just go back to business as usual. So we have to address that. We really have to focus on capacity building issues. We have to look at the benefits of incorporation to give people access to programs. And on the other side, we have to encourage big customers to consider cases where people who are self-employed may be able to do the job, and they can build in other kinds of protections to minimize risk. You're going to hear lots about the different councils that exist and what their processes are for becoming certified. And the organizations which support women and diverse entrepreneurs should have this, in my view, higher on their radar. A lot of people focus on access to financing. Access to financing is one of the things we always talk about with respect to women entrepreneurs and Black entrepreneurs and others. We have to also start talking more about access to markets. And I think that some of these supplier diversity opportunities would fit into that category, because having customers is as important as having access to investments or loans. And we need to keep pushing the envelope in terms of building capacity for women and diverse entrepreneurs in this space. So with that, I'll end and say thank you so very much for making time available to talk about this really important issue, because as I said from the outset, when we think about developing a more inclusive innovation and entrepreneurship ecosystem, procurement is one of the most important strategic levers. Thank you very much.
Excellent. Super. Thank you very much, Wendy, for sharing such an insightful foundation for us to carry forward into the panel discussion. Today, we're joined by Sylvia Pensac, the President and CEO of the Women's Business Enterprises Canada, better known as WBE, a Canadian not-for-profit organization certifying women-owned businesses and opening the doors to corporate and government supply chains under supplier diversity programs across North America. We also have Stephanie Fontaine here with us, the Regional Director for the US and Canada at WeConnect International, a global organization whose mission is to help drive money into the hands of women business owners by enabling them to compete in the global marketplace. As the President of the Canadian Aboriginal Minority Supply Council, CAMC, Cassandra Dorrington and her team lead the charge of cultivating business relationships and economic growth of the Canadian supply chain through the inclusion of Aboriginal and minority suppliers. Daryl Sherman is the co-founder and CEO of the CGLCC, Canada's LGBT+ Chamber of Commerce, a national not-for-profit organization with a mission to expand the opportunities and advancement of the LGBT+ business community in Canada. We'll also hear from Deirdre Gee, President and co-founder of the Inclusive Workplace Supply Council of Canada, who is leading the IWSCC through its continuous growth, seeking opportunities for collaboration and expansion at every turn. Welcome everyone for being with us and to the discussion this afternoon. Just a reminder to the audience to submit any questions you may have through the Q&A box, and we'll be addressing them as many as we can at the end of the session. Okay, let's get started. I think it's important to first clarify some of the terms that are commonly cited. Dr. Souquier's presentation helped to explain terms such as social procurement, social enterprise, and inclusive procurement. So what exactly is supplier diversity? And how does it specifically differ from diversity, equity, and inclusion? Cassandra and Daryl, would you like to open up the conversation for us?
I'll let Daryl begin and then I'll jump in on top of that. We've been playing this take back and forth, so I know he has this down pat.
Well, and I was going to offer the same to you, but okay, I'm happy to do it. So thanks, Allison. Appreciate being here and for the opportunity. And I think Wendy did a great job of covering, what is supplier diversity and kind of some of the different terms. I think at the end of the day, we look at supplier diversity as really leveling the playing field and creating opportunities and access for diverse-owned businesses. And she touched upon the fact that we know diverse-owned businesses are underrepresented in public and corporate supply chain. And this is really about making sure that diverse-owned businesses have that opportunity to compete. And it's not about, special access. It's not about handouts. It's not a guarantee for contracts. It is very much just giving them an opportunity to sit at the table to compete. And that is very much what it is. I don't know, Cassandra, if there's anything else you wanted to add into that.
Well, as we know, Wendy did a fantastic job, and you've overlaid on top of that. I just want our audience to be aware of there's a number of terms, as Wendy and both Daryl have identified. You will hear social procurement, you will hear social enterprises, you'll hear supply diversity, you'll hear economic inclusion, and there's probably others on top of that. Depending on the organization you're talking to, make sure they clarify what they're talking about, because we're talking about leveling the playing field to make sure it's all inclusive. And so you want to make sure that they're using the terminology in the same space, because a lot of corporations are using it. The other thing that, and again, with Daryl and with what Dr. Sukiya has said, is that this program is usually layered on top of a D&I program inside of an organization. Supplier diversity doesn't just happen to an organization. They wake up and say, we're going to be inclusive. Let's bring everyone to the table. It's because they understand the value of diversity and inclusion as it looks with their workforce. Once they start to see success, then they start to have a better understanding that diversity overarching across the whole of the organization will benefit them all. And it's easier to then take that concept that we talked about, the leveling the playing field, and starting to broaden that. And I think that's where the essence of when he gave you a slate of companies, that's where the essence, they start from there and then they build on top of that.
So, Allison, you asked how supplier diversity differs from diversity, equity, and inclusion. And actually, it is part of DE&I. It is really needs to be part of any organization's DE&I strategy. I think if you take the analogy, which we probably all have heard a million times, diversity is really being invited to the party, whereas inclusion is having the opportunity to contribute to that dance list, right, to that playlist. But equity is making sure that everybody has the opportunity to actually dance. And that is very much what supplier diversity is. It's making sure that everybody is invited, that everybody has the opportunity to be part of this and to actually bid on that. So that is, to counter your question, it doesn't differ. It is very much in alignment to DE&I.
Excellent, very well said. Wonderful. Sylvia and Stephanie, I'm going to turn to you now. All of the panelists are representative supply councils, which support underrepresented suppliers. Can you explain what your organization does and how you help to advance supplier diversity in Canada?
Absolutely. So I can get us started. So first of all, I am going to just say what is the same for all the councils. While we differ in the groups which we support, we do have some commonalities among ourselves. So number one thing that we have in common is certification services. So all the councils actually certified suppliers that are 51% or majority owned, managed, and controlled by a certain group. Also, in the case of VB Canada, We Connect International, it will be women. In case of CAMSI, it will be visible minorities and Aboriginal community. In case of Daryl and CGLCC, it will be LGBTQ2+ community. In case of the IWSCC, they certify people with disabilities and veteran communities. So we all do certification services. Unlike many people out there in the communities think, we do much more. So that is just the tip of the iceberg for the councils. So another thing that we provide all the councils are networking opportunities. So we allow the connections among buyers and suppliers. So we provide matchmaker opportunities, events, connections. We even supply the lists to the corporations when they are looking for suppliers in a specific category. We also provide peer connections for the buyers, where buyers can meet, exchange the ideas and best practices. So in addition to all of that, the 4 Canadian councils created Supplier Diversity Alliance Canada. So what we do as DIC, we actually collaborate to provide advocacy work on behalf of Canadian suppliers. So we work very closely with governments and the public to make sure that there is awareness of supplier diversity in Canada. On behalf of VB Canada, I would just mention that we do have a variety of programs that we offer to both suppliers and the buyers. And I do know that variety of councils will differ in how we support our communities, because as you can imagine, our communities are different. They have different needs and they need different supports. So each council will provide their own programs and supports for their community. So it's the same with VB Canada.
Yeah, thank you, Sylvia, for representing all of us. I think that was really well done. So I'm not sure what I can add to that, except maybe say a little bit more about WeConnect International. So we are a global network that connects women-owned businesses to qualified buyers around the world. So we currently certify in 47 countries around the world, including Canada. And we register women-owned businesses in over 125 countries. So in terms of working with the corporations, of course, we do that as well. And we have member corporations such as the ones that Wendy mentioned earlier. And in Canada, our work here is, is focused on the local supplier diversity leaders and the buyers to advance their inclusive sourcing supplier diversity program efforts. And we really aim to be making those buyer-seller connections. And that's because that is what our community is telling us is the first and most prioritized benefit that they want and expect to have from being part of communities such as these. So we do that through matchmaking events, monthly meet the buyer activities where suppliers do pitches, pardon. And we also do that through our digital platform where the technology can do the matching based on the procurement opportunities that the buyers post, as well as the keywords in the supplier profiles. And I think all of the different councils have, similar activities to that. So I would say, in a nutshell, to answer your question, what does WeConnect International and the other councils do to advance supplier diversity in Canada? Is we find, we prepare, and we connect the diverse suppliers to the buyers.
Allison, if I can just jump in for a sec, I think we use the term in Canada, but I think, Stephanie, you can talk about beyond Canada, because I think you're the lever point to other areas, because I know I've worked with WeConnect International in other global regions. Mm-hmm. So you want to talk a little bit about sort of some of the expansion?
Yeah, absolutely. So as I said, we certify in 47 countries, but I think the unique value proposition really is for the suppliers that have a plan to export. And as Wendy said, like that is, a lever for growth. We need to encourage more suppliers to export. So by being part of the WeConnect International network, of course, it's a little bit easier to make those connections because I have counterparts and a great team of colleagues sitting in other countries that do the same thing. So it's easy for us to just say, hey, come to an event in Europe, in Australia, South Africa, wherever we're having events. And then not only can the suppliers meet buyers in other regions of the world, but they can connect with the other women-owned businesses in our case. And what we've seen is some great partnerships develop with the women, and then sometimes they bid together on global opportunities.
And if I can just add to that, because I just wanted to touch on, because all the SDAC, we have connections into the US when you look at all our members. And so I want to make sure that any suppliers on the line know any of the councils can go into that. And then a few of us can go beyond that. So it just depends on how we grow the economy back. And I just think there's so many opportunities.
That's a very good point. A very good point. So thank you for raising that. Daryl or Deidre, did you want to jump in here, or has that question been answered from your standpoint?
On my side, I think that they've done a good job of answering. So nothing else, I think, at this point.
Okay, great. I think I might have lost Deidre. I'm hoping she can reconnect. Sylvia mentioned, Daryl, I'm going to turn to you. Sylvia mentioned a little bit about the certification, that it's similar. Did you want to just expand a little bit in terms of the process, what it means, and what are some of the benefits, if suppliers are interested in certifying with the council?
Yeah, absolutely. So you're right. And Sylvia did kind of touch on the fact that all of the process in general is very similar across all of the different councils. And so there will be some nuances, obviously, depending on the constituency group. But in general, the process for certification is very similar. And that usually starts with an application. So depending on which community group, you would reach out to the respective certifying body and complete an application process. And really what that application process is going to be looking for is, again, what you heard earlier on from Wendy is that key piece being that ownership, management, and control element being 51% or more by that particular diverse community group. So that's one of the things that we're going to be assessing in that, or reviewing in that application. But we also need to see things like incorporation documents, financials. There's a whole host of information that we're collecting in that application process, including an application fee. There is a fee that goes along with certification. And from that application, what each of the councils do is they're taking that information and reviewing it and ensuring that, again, that the applicant is meeting the criteria for certification, which we've heard about, the key one being that ownership, 51%. Also, ensuring that they are either a Canadian citizen or a permanent resident, ensuring that they are a for-profit organization, as well as that they're able to provide goods or services, obviously. So what the next step is really to have an assessor. Each of the councils will conduct an assessment. Most of them in today's age is being done virtually now. Have an assessor that will again work with that and meet with that supplier to verify the information, validate that information. If they're successful, they will get their certification and then be added to each of the specific council's supplier database, which is shared with our corporate or public partners. So that's kind of a run through quickly of the certification process. But maybe now that Deidre's back, Deidre, do you want to talk a little bit about some of the benefits that come on the supplier side through certification?
Yeah, sorry about that. Two laptops crashed at the same time. It's always fun. At any rate, yeah. So I like to share a story about back in the day when I first became involved with supplier diversity and I worked with a WEBE certified organization. I knew nothing about supplier diversity. I was relatively new with the company, like 3 weeks new, and I went to a networking session. I'm not sure who was putting it on, maybe WEBE, but so it was a roundtable networking session. I walked in there having zero idea what I was doing, but I knew the content of what my company was doing. And so I wound up sitting at table after table and spending my 5 to 10 minutes sharing what I do and what our company's offerings were with like top purchasers in fantastic organizations that are Canadian as well as multinational. I always try to remember who was there, but RBC was there, City of Toronto was there, TD, Sodexo, Accenture, I think GM was there, TELUS was there. And I couldn't believe they wanted to talk to me. And I couldn't believe I had this level of access to people. Like ordinarily, how do you find like a top purchasing professional for TD, for example, if you don't have that already communication or contact information. So I left after about an hour and a half, maybe 2 hours. I had 9 to 10 business cards, contact information. I was able to say to these purchasers, here's what our offerings are. And can you tell me more about how that fits inside your organization? They told me things like, well, that's a 2-year contract. The RFP is up in a year's time. Here's the person you contact. This is how it works with our organization. Here's my name and number. Feel free to reach out. Like, it was the best networking I've ever been to. And I've been in sales for like 100 years. So I know networking, and I still say that this is the most lucrative networking opportunity. I get very excited about it now. We do lots of matchmaking events. We do virtual now, but back in the day, of course, pre-pandemic, we did them all live. But you have this opportunity to sit down. These people want to talk to you because you're diversely owned, and they recognize the value of that out-of-the-box thinking, that workaround that diverse business owners have, how they can, fit them into their supply chain. They have a mandate sometimes to spend more dollars with diverse suppliers. Whatever the reasoning is, they're there to talk to you, and they want you as part of their supply chain. And so it's, again, the best networking that I've ever been to. So for me, that's the hugest of benefits. But also corporations are very interested in ensuring that you understand how to do business with them. So before you even start the networking opportunity or networking conversation, a lot of times you can learn from these businesses just what it takes to get even to the point where you can get involved with their supply chain. So you really learn the ins and outs. In the supplier diversity world is kind of like a family. So we get along quite well most of the time, and we support each other extremely well. So there's a lot of communication and back and forth sales between suppliers, as well as between suppliers and corporates. We know that typically diverse suppliers, as they grow and they need to procure, they're probably going to look at other diverse suppliers. So here you are sitting with 1,000+ access to diverse business owners, as well as this fantastic access to corporations. So it's and the business building, the capacity building, it's just all right there for you. And I say to people, this is like one fantastic tool in your marketing toolbox. Like, this is something that you can leverage on a monthly basis. You have access to these fantastic opportunities and learnings how to get there and how to do business. So obviously I'm passionate about it. I absolutely love it. I think it's a great opportunity for entrepreneurs, and I share that information every chance I get.
No, that's great. Sorry to interrupt. Did you want to say something?
No, I was just going to, just to build on one of the points that Deidre makes. I also like how you say we get along most of the time. I think that's true. I like to think it's all the time. I think you quickly touched on capacity building and development, and I think that's actually a really key benefit as well. Certainly, hands down, it's that connection, those networks that you're creating not only with the corporates but other small businesses and other diverse businesses. But I think it's the development opportunities that come along with this. So each of our councils, that is our role as well, as to help to develop our suppliers. But it's also the corporates on their part as well. Those corporates that have strong programs, that's a key component of those programs, is to help to develop those suppliers to make sure that they can continue to grow and achieve greater opportunities for contracts. So I think that's a really important one. So whether it's through educational conferences, summits, webinars, or actually development opportunities where, many of our corporates will do mentorship sessions, and it's, working with our suppliers over, 1, 2, 3 months to develop very focused mentorship, provide very targeted mentorship. So I think that's another really important element to add in.
Excellent.
Yes, absolutely. One last thing, Alison, is I love the willingness of the corporates to work with the suppliers. As we're working with our matchmaking sessions, I hear sometimes from my suppliers like, oh my goodness, I'm afraid to talk to her. And I always explain that these people are as on your side as they are on their own organization side. And their plan is to get you into the supply chain, however we can make that work. And so it's such a welcoming perspective. So when you are pitching and networking with these people. It's not necessarily a hard sell. These people want to hear what you have to say, and they're willing to help you ensure that what you're saying is what they need to hear. So it's, again, very, very supportive that way.
Excellent. Wonderful. Well, so I guess it's through your networking sessions, through your relationships with government and corporate buyers, that you're able to expose your diverse suppliers who are certified with you to opportunities that come and put them together. Because I know people are often wondering how do they get into this supply chain. You know, Wendy mentioned, you know, sort of the tiered approach, you know, for a lot of women entrepreneurs and diverse. Sometimes, you know, contracting directly with the government or large corporations is impossible. But it's I think I'm hearing, and maybe somebody can elaborate a little bit more, it's the relationships that the members have a chance to develop, to build on and supply indirectly or through, you know, coordinated efforts throughout the supply chain. Is that correct?
I think you're correct in that, and I want to be even clearer than that. A lot of these, our audience here have businesses. They're already doing business. They're in a supply chain now. So we get confused thinking this is the big, they're already supplying for a business. So they're already doing that. So what we want to do is take away the fear of, oh my God, I can't bid for RBC business. I can't bid for this. What we've done is we lessen the barriers by getting them at the same table to talk. And once they're able to have that discussion with an EY, an RBC, a TELUS, and all of a sudden it becomes less threatening. And they say, oh, we'll get your data either from one of the councils, or why don't you, knowing that you're certified with the councils, why don't you go on our portal and put your data in there? Once their data gets into this corporate portal or a government portal, now you're part of that mix. And then they say, we have an RFP coming up, you might want to take a look at it. And all of a sudden, baby steps, they're now in the supply chain, they're now bidding on an opportunity. And it's as simple as that. So we want to demystify that this is this big, scary thing. You're already doing business. This is the easiest step for you, that once this becomes Joe that you're talking to, Lori that you're talking to, Marcy you're talking to, it's not as scary as, oh my God, I'm going into a TELUS supply chain, what do I do? You're talking to an individual who says, go into the portal, load your information up, and we've got a couple of RFPs coming up, just take a look at them. It's as straightforward as that.
Yeah, and I would just add to that, you know, what you mentioned, Alison, is our relationships, but there's more than that, because there's not only relationships, there's also actual programs. So corporations and governments have actual supplier diversity programs that they put in place where they are measuring, tracking their spend with diverse suppliers. So they are looking for more suppliers to add into their pool of suppliers. They are looking for more suppliers who can deliver and bid on those RFPs and win the contract so that they can increase their spend with diverse suppliers. So supplier diversity is not just the relationship, it's actual business, and it is a measurement within the corporations, and they actually report on that internally within their organizations or with tiered programs. You know, smaller organization or tier one organization reports to the large organization, you know, this is our spend on your specific project, this is how much we spent with diverse suppliers. So the programming and the policies that are behind supplier diversity programs are actually what make it all possible and what creates the opportunities for diverse suppliers, if that makes sense.
And I'd like to build a little bit more on what Sylvia, sorry, Stephanie.
No, go
really
ahead.
Quick, I like to make sure that we also manage our suppliers' expectations, in that this is not a get rich quick scheme. You don't get your name put on the list and the list gets sent to all the corporates, and then you sit on the couch and you wait for the orders to come piling in. It doesn't work that way. You still have to have the price point. You still have to have everything remains the same. This is, as I said, this is an access tool. This is a marketing tool in your marketing toolbox, but all of those other things have to be, it's not a handout. We're helping you learn how to fish as opposed to feeding you the fish.
Yeah, that's so important, Deidre. So I'm glad you brought it up. And I was also going to touch on something that Cassandra said about the supplier diversity and vendor portals. So obviously you've all heard here today that the first step is get certified to become part of the network. but then you need to be visible. Like you need to attend events, whether they're in person, virtual. You need to bid on opportunities. That's how things advance in the supply chains. But also, it's really important that you keep your profile updated, because when the buyers go in to search for you, some of them are very strict about not accepting certifications that have expired, or in the case of WeConnect International, where we have technology doing that extra step of doing the matching. If you have a new service or product, but you haven't updated your business profile, then you are maybe missing opportunities because those keywords are not, being captured. So really important to stay on top of all of those things, be visible, and stay up to date.
Very good points. Very, very good points. Super. I'm wondering, and this is a question for everyone, if you had a project or an initiative that you're particularly proud of, or that you've implemented, or that you're working on, and how that's, sort of moving the goalposts or advancing supplier diversity. Who would like to start?
I think we'll all take one. Let me start with one small one, okay?
Great.
The team that you're looking at here, I'd like to believe that the work of supplier diversity has gone this far because of the team of people you're looking at here. These organizations have worked really hard making connections. We continue to refine that. One of the things that we're looking at, and we're working with TENT out of New York and TD, we're actually modifying our certification program to incorporate entrepreneurs with refugee experience. We recognize what's changed in the Canadian landscape. We recognize that we need to get the underserved at the table. And this is another population of those underserved who are not being invited to the table. So we've been working closely with TD and TENT, and you'll probably see it rolled out in early 2022, that we are going to certify entrepreneurs with refugee experience. Because again, it's been a request coming from our corporates. We see these entrepreneurs happening across Canada, like the constituency groups that we all serve, they are underserved. They are not finding their way to the table to be able to bring their products or service. And we say, how do we ensure that the Canadian economy gets stronger because it's more inclusive of all? So that's one of the key initiatives that CAMSI's been working on lately. So I'll hand it off to someone else to talk about some of the other exciting things that are coming down the pipe.
That's super interesting. Thank you for updating us on that, Cassandra.
I can go next. Oh, go ahead, Daryl.
Sure. Okay, I'll be quick, but I think Cassandra, I think that's a great initiative, and I had I've been talking to TENT, and I'm so happy that you're working on that. So congratulations. One of the things, and it might not seem that significant, but we're always looking to how do we continue to advance supplier diversity. I think that was part of your question, Allison, and for us, we represent the LGBT plus community, but up until just recently, we've actually only ever certified those people that identify as lesbian, gay, bisexual, transgender, leaving out a large group of people that choose to identify differently. And so we actually work very closely with our counterparts in the US, so the NGLCC. So similar somewhat to Stephanie, and she has a global network. We also work very closely with LGBT plus chambers of commerce around the world, but we work very closely with our counterparts to look at how do we expand the variety, I guess, or the scope of those businesses under the LGBT plus umbrella. And so very recently, as of last month, we've expanded it to include businesses that identify as queer. And again, I know that might not seem like a lot, but in terms of ensuring the integrity of the program and the validation of the program, I talked a little bit about the rigor that goes into this. And so it was a very long process to look at, expanding the definition of those businesses that we're certifying. But it required us engaging with our corporate and public partners to make sure that that aligned with their mandates and kind of what they're looking in their definitions, as well as, like I said, our global partners. So I'm really proud of the fact that we've expanded the definition to be able now to certify those businesses that are LGBTQ.
That's great, Daryl. I hadn't realized you were working on that as well. Very, very good. Stephanie, did you want to?
Yeah, well, first, congratulations. I love to see that supplier diversity and certification is being expanded and, as you said, is evolving to reflect the world that we live in. So that's awesome. One of the initiatives that I'm really proud of at We Connect International is this year in Q1, we launched our year-long Rise to the Challenge campaign. And that is an initiative where we're working with all our member buyers for them to make large public commitments to increase their purchases with women-owned businesses. And you can certainly see some of those commitments on our website, and we continue to have discussions because these things don't happen overnight. Like, they happen through a lot of discussions, with us and then internally in those organizations. But we believe that these efforts will move the needle because they go beyond just being aspirational, and they are real tangible actions that these organizations are taking. So that's something that we continue to work on. And I'm really proud of it.
Excellent.
Thank you for sharing that, Stephanie. Great.
I can go next, Allison.
Sure.
So I have two programs I would like to highlight, but as we are talking about improvements to certification, about 2 years ago, WEKH Canada found a gap in women entrepreneurship space in certification. We found that Canadian women who are citizens of Canada, and they established their business in the US, they had nowhere to certify. So WEKH Canada decided to cover that gap. So Canadian women-owned businesses who are living in the US, they are running businesses in the US, they can now certify with WEKH Canada. And this way they can at least utilize their Canadian certification for supplier diversity programs in the US, Canada, or anywhere globally. So that is on the side of certification. So my two programs are, number one, supplier diversity research. So I'm a strong believer that what doesn't get measured doesn't get improved. So WEKH Canada was very happy to release two supplier diversity research studies this year. So number one was the state of BB certification in Canada, released in June. And the second one is the state of supplier diversity programs in Canada, released this September. So these programs basically looked at how supplier diversity is evolving, what is happening in supply chains, what is happening on the woman business side, and where do we go from there. So there were some recommendations. The reports are available on our website, bbcanada.ca, under research. So anybody can access them, and a huge thank you to University of Manitoba and University of Calgary for their support and partnership on these reports. The second program I want to highlight is also a program that came out during COVID. So as you can hear, all the councils were busy during COVID. We didn't just sit back and waited for a reopening to happen. We launched a program called Supplier Diversity Accelerator. And that one also resulted out of what we've seen in the marketplace. So some of you may know that supplier diversity has a long history in the US. About 95% of all Fortune 500 companies already have some sort of supplier diversity program. The story is very different in Canada. We are very new to supplier diversity. The first council, CAMSI, started just slightly over 15 years ago. So we have a long, big gap to fill. So we are kind of moving ahead, and we realized, there's a lot more corporations and governments who have no idea what supplier diversity is, how to establish the program, how to get started about it. So this is why we set up Supplier Diversity Accelerator, to kind of support corporations and governments who want to set up, launch their programs or improve it, and we assign a consultant to them. We provide the training and support best practices, and we support them that way. So currently we have 40 organizations who are part of the program. We can handle, oh my goodness, 10 times more. If other organizations are ready, we'll be happy to take on more. So there's a lot of work, the groundwork that is happening in Canada that I do believe will have a huge impact in the years to come on where supplier diversity gets from here. So I do want to mention some of the results of this program because it does sound like, well, how does it apply to me? So one organization hired their first VB 2 months after joining the program and starting the supplier diversity programs, which is huge. Usually it takes about a year to develop the program and then get going. Another organization developed their tier 2 reporting, which means more organizations who requested to report on their diversity spend. Another one built and executed an incredible internal communication strategy to inform and engage internal teams about supplier diversity, which resulted in a commitment with all diverse councils in Canada, which is huge. And of course, we are also working with one of our member organizations who need to spend $90 million with diverse suppliers, and they just don't know where to begin. So there's lots of great stories in Canada happening. It makes my heart sing. It makes me happy because I do want to see diverse suppliers to succeed, see the opportunities grow, scale up, and then overtake global markets as well.
If I could just add to that, that's wonderful. And I'm glad Sylvia put that out because each of the councils have seen incredible growth in corporate membership this year. And I mean, as Sylvia's talking, we've had Apple come to the table saying we're looking to spend hundreds of millions of dollars with diverse suppliers in Canada. We've been working strongly as they've been building out their team across Canada. We've had them plus others. We've recently had one of when the aerospace firms come and want to set up a program. And I mean, so we're seeing, as Sylvia is saying that, the nice thing about what she's saying is that it's not restrictive to women, because I'm sure I've seen it unfortunately, because of the death of George Floyd last year, supplier diversity has got a big uptake, and supplier diversity across the globe, across the various groups have gotten a big uptake. And so it's unfortunate that we had to take that route to get there, but corporations are now being, as you've heard Stephanie say, and you've heard Deidre say, they're coming out with their named objectives to say, we want to spend money with these suppliers. And I know Daryl and I have been on an international panel together where we've been talking about supplier diversity and how we've managed to bring the barriers down globally. So we're getting suppliers export ready to pair up with suppliers in other countries to actually pull that forward. So there's a lot of great success stories right now in each of the councils because we believe corporates and governments are now ready. We love to believe the people on the line are ready, because we have them calling, looking for these suppliers. So if they're ready to sign up, there's opportunities are there.
That's great. I mean, it's so wonderful to be a part of it when it's starting to move, because I know you guys have been playing in the background on this topic for a very long time. But I did want to go back to Deidre, if you wanted to just answer that last question.
Thanks, Alice. Thank you. It's always just so cool to hear what everybody's up to. We talk a lot, but we don't always share these kinds of initiatives because we just frankly don't have time. We have a lot of other things that we're discussing as a group, but so that's very cool, and congratulations to everyone. Real quickly, to build on what Sylvia said, what doesn't get measured doesn't get moved, and so this is where IWSCC is right now. We're creating those benchmark measurements. So there is no real good quality stats out there on terms of veteran entrepreneurs in Canada. We don't have numbers, we don't have locations, we don't have capability. And very much so the same with people with disabilities who own businesses in Canada. I think our last real information that came out was the survey on disability, which was 2017. So we know that there's more information out there. So we're in the middle of a landmark research project on veterans in Canada. We'll be doing the same thing for disabled entrepreneurs in Canada starting in the new year. A lot of that information is going to be made available free to veterans and the disabled in terms of helping to build their business. And then we're also informing our corporates on how to serve those constituencies better, both within their supply chain, their employee base, as well as out in the general public. And really quickly, the last thing, because it's so new and I'm super excited about it, and it's been something that's bugged me for years and years and years, we received some funding along with a couple of partners to be able to do a deep dive into accessible procurement procedures in Canada. So we're going to be pulling that all apart, finding out what those barriers are, informing the government on what they are. Hopefully they'll take some steps. But again, that's information that we're going to be able to share with our suppliers and our corporate members within the next 18 months of that project. So great things are happening clearly with all the councils. It's very exciting.
And congratulations to you all. I've been just watching the chat, and there seems to be great interest in making sure that we follow your progress on this. So hopefully we'll get an update from everyone as we go along. Okay, I'm recognizing time. I was wondering, this question again for all, is there some nugget that you can share with our audience in terms of, if there was one recommendation or one piece of advice or things that you've heard, one special, a special spice to the sauce, the recipe, could you let us know what that would be, please?
I have a simple one to get us started. Get certified. This is the time to join the game. Companies are looking, so get certified.
I'll go next. Something simple. I learned this when I started my own business many years ago. My mentor said, find your sweet spot and work your sweet spot. As a business owner, don't try to be everything to everybody. Do what you do very well. You can, if someone comes to you with something else that doesn't fit in your sweet spot, hand it off to somebody else. Now you build a relationship with somebody else that when they get something, they'll hand it off to you. Know and work your sweet spot.
Very good advice. Very, very good advice. Thank you.
I think Stephanie touched on this earlier, but I think it's show up. Just because, you get certified does not mean that you're going to get contracts. You have to show up. You have to work this. It is another tool in your toolbox, but unless you know how to use it and you're actually leveraging it. If I go back to my dance analogy, yeah, so you have the ticket to the dance, but you need to actually get out there and dance, right? So you have to show up, you have to be active, and you have to participate.
Perfect.
Yeah, and I want to add to that, and I don't know, maybe it's specifically like to the women's space, but apply for awards. Like when I call you, don't say, no, it's not for me. Just, apply, take that chance. And when we ask suppliers to be on a panel to share their successes and their challenges, other diverse suppliers want to hear those things. So don't be afraid to say, yes, I'll be on the panel. I'll take a chance and do it. So that's all part of being visible.
And some words I know that salespeople and entrepreneurs don't usually like to hear, but practice, drill, and rehearse. Find out what the niche is. Where can you fill the need for that person you're presenting to? Don't come to them and say, here's everything I do. Where can we help you? Figure out where they need you and tell them how you can help them. And then practice that and rehearse that in front of others so that when you're there, you're comfortable, you're relaxed, and you're ready to present and just go for it.
Allison, let me share one little story. I went to a conference and a lot of the entrepreneurs were asked to pitch. So some signed up to pitch and they were down to the, let's say 5 top contenders went up to pitch. And one that I thought was absolutely excellent did not win, but they were the one that all the corporates trooped over to their table, gave them a card, said, let me talk to what you do. So precisely what you're here, show up, deliver. If you're asked to be in a panel, as Stephanie said, be there. You have the opportunity to tell everybody in that conference what your product or service is. If you stood in a conference room, you couldn't have that type of exposure, but you're now in front of the crowd and you're able to do that. And whether this person didn't win the pitch competition, but they won the work. That was even more important.
Very good point. And the beauty of these types of panels is your experience is so vast and different that you really make it meaningful for the audience. So thank you very much for that. I'm going to end this part of this session with looking for a success story that you might like to share with the group. Again, the question for all of you, who would like to begin?
Well,
did you have any to share?
I can start, and I actually think, Cassandra, maybe you stole the one that I was going to talk about, because I think it was my supplier that you're talking about. But I think it's worth giving a little bit of context, because and I talked earlier about, the development opportunities. And so one of the things that we do in partnership with one of our corporate partners, EY, is do a pitch competition. And it's really meant to help them fine tune their pitches, get them ready to actually get in front of corporates. And so this particular women-owned supplier in green tech based out of Edmonton, she went through the pitch competition and she was successful. She won. And part of that then came the opportunity to travel with us down to our counterpart's larger conference in the US at the NGLCC, where she had the opportunity to, what Cassandra mentioned is like, be part of the pitch competition on a large scale. So here you're pitching in front of 1,500 businesses. I think they have over 500 different global companies that are there. She didn't win, but you're right, Cassandra, like she had people lined up, literally they were lined up to talk to her. And, some of the things, and I actually don't know, if, her success rate with contracts, but I know that shortly after, she was invited to participate in 2 different US-based companies' mentorship programs. So she, for several weeks, she was flying down to the US as part of this 2 different corporate mentorship programs, which was invaluable to her at that time. So I think that, to me, that's a great success. Even if at the end of the day, she didn't win the pitch competition, and I'm not sure if she won any contracts, but the development that she got out of this was great.
That's such a great story. Now, it goes to show that, like Stephanie was mentioning, take advantage of whatever is offered to you and be bold and confident to do it. Others that might like to share, Cassandra.
I had one of my suppliers in Montreal. So we had a conference, we had a session in Montreal, and I needed a supplier to come and speak. And they were like, I'm really busy. And they were doing work with Merck in Europe. And so they didn't have time, but I convinced them to come into Montreal to speak. He had been trying to get a hold of the Merck person in Montreal and had not been able to connect. Through him coming to that session, he was now able to increase his business in the Canadian landscape because they just didn't find any opportunities. It's amazing what happens when you show up at these functions. It's amazing who you meet and what connections are you able to make. Because even though you live in the same spot, it's not that simple all the time. And so we just have, and so when you ask for successes, it's hard because we have opportunities that just connect the people. And then the ball starts to roll and the snowball gets bigger and bigger and bigger.
Won't it be great when we can actually do that back in person again? I'm really looking forward to that. Good example. Thank you. Sylvia, Stephanie, David?
So we have a couple of companies actually that pivoted early on in the pandemic to sell PPE, and the corporates through supplier diversity were excellent. In fact, kept those companies open. A couple of them, one of them, and actually 2 of them hired on new people, but one of them hired on 4 new people and still was able to keep them going and still has them as employees currently. So, and that wouldn't have happened, I don't think. Well, it wouldn't have happened without the connections in the supplier diversity world because the relationship was there, the trust was there, the information was already into their portals. They already knew about the company and had done some work with them in other capacities. And so it was just a shoe-in, just a matter of filling in the orders and sending out the supplies. So that was fantastic for those organizations.
Great. Super.
Yeah, I wanted to say there's definitely a lot of success stories, and usually it's a supplier that came to an event and they met a buyer and then eventually they signed a contract. So we do publish a lot of those success stories on our website, but I think it's important, and somebody said it earlier, I can't remember who, but these successes, especially the contracts, they don't happen overnight. They happen over time and through building the connections. So if you're looking for that like quick, success story, and your definition of success is only like signing a contract, you may be disappointed if you're expecting that to happen in like the first few months of your certification. So I would also say like you need to ask yourself, what does success mean to you? And one little story that I've always carried, remembered from my early years in supplier diversity, it was a woman who got her business certified, and a year later, when it was time to renew, she said, well, I didn't win any contracts. And I thought she was going to say, well, it's not been successful. But what she said is, this has been an amazing success story this last year, because I went from knowing nothing about pitching to supply chain and procurement, and now I have 1 year's worth of knowledge and I know so much more. So that's my success story. So, I think it's important that we can define success stories in different ways.
Very good point. Very good point. Lastly, Sylvia.
Yeah, absolutely. I have somewhat a Cinderella story. So just to show that miracles do happen in business world, but one of our suppliers, and again, she's not new to supplier diversity, so it's not like she just got certified and it happened. But one of our suppliers was really looking to sell her products to Subaru. And Subaru is an interesting company because they only purchase in the US, and they do not have a formal supplier diversity program. They do buy from diverse suppliers, they track, but they do not work with any councils. So no councils, whether US, global, any. So VB Canada is part of something what I call Team Canada. So Team Canada is councils working closely with the government, promoting Canadian businesses globally. So we worked very closely with Global Affairs to help that VB to get connected to Subaru and utilize her VB certification in the US with the company that has supplier diversity so embedded into them, but not working with any of the councils. And guess what? It happened during pandemic while borders were closed. And in December, we were able to provide the introduction between Canadian consulate in Detroit and us. We were able to help find the right contacts, connect them. And in June, I met her and she was like, Sylvia, guess what? We won, we have a contract. So sometimes it can happen very quickly. So it can go from, December introduction, June contract signed. But again, I just want to say what Stephanie and Dave mentioned, that many times it takes years of building those connections, understanding the processes. That VB was actually well prepared because they were already working with some other corporations within supplier diversity. So their work with other organizations was accepted with that company. So that's just one of the examples how your certification can actually work outside of our networks, because our councils are well connected. We work closely with government, global affairs. So we have networks all around the globe, and we talk, all right? So Deidre mentioned it multiple times. We meet, we talk, we support suppliers, and we work very hard behind the scenes.
Excellent. Thank you very much. And I noticed we're a little bit over time and the questions are rolling in. So I'll try to get to as many questions as I can. Before I begin, though, I just wanted to mention that there is another supply council that does certify suppliers. It's the Canadian Council for Aboriginal Businesses, better known as CCAB. I know Cassandra's company as well as certifies Aboriginal businesses, but I specifically wanted to mention that CCAB will be joining us for our Indigenous Opportunities session, which will be happening November the 4th. So having a full session on Indigenous entrepreneurs in terms of building capacity and understanding procurement. So there have been a few questions in the chat box on that, and I'll save it and pass it along to those that will be participating in that session. So just looking quickly, I'm going to ask a question here. Oh, this is a good one. And this is for anyone on the panel. Are there certain industries or products or services that are more successful than others, in your opinion?
That's a bold question, a broad question. It depends on what industry you're in. It depends on what service you're in. If you're in the automotive industry and automotives are looking for logistics, they're looking for a machinist, they're looking for a whole range of guys. If you're in the services business, then you're probably better off, and some of the government departments are looking for services, EY is looking for services, things like that. But any organization, the councils will know this, and I laugh when I say this, we'll ask the corporate members, what are you looking for? And they'll tell us, we buy everything. So really, and it's not as simple as what's most successful. It's identifying the area that you want to grow in. So if you're looking to do a retail work and TJX is there and Sobeys is there, things like that, if you're trying to grow that, then identify who's in the retail sector, and then let's get an idea of where your product fits inside there or where your service fits. But it's not as easy a question, and you really have to do a little bit of research on there.
So no trends that you can see that your corporates or governments are asking you for. I guess I've had a few questions in the chat, and so it really, I'm hearing you. It really depends where you
trends. We're into IT, we're into cybersecurity are huge right now. We just gone through PPE, huge right now. But as we go to resuming business, the whole world of virtual is still huge. What can I do virtually? How do I help them? Security continues to be. So if you follow the wave, you'll see different things. But if you have a tried and true product, you know who your supply, you know who you're trying to attract. You know, I mean, if I'm working with the retail and I have cultural foods or ethnic foods, if Sobeys or, you know, these guys are now looking, I'm trying to track, where are they starting to put it into their stores? How do I get in front of them? What does that look like? If Starbucks is starting to have more growth across Canada, where's Starbucks looking to put in that middle aisle to supply from? So it just really depends on where your market is.
Okay. All right, I'm just making sure nobody else wants to jump in there. Okay, another question regarding certification. Does certification assure some financial stability of the supplier? Who would like to answer that?
Yes and no. So on behalf of WEKH Canada, what we do, we also check whether your taxes are paid. We want to make sure that your tax status is actually okay with the government of Canada, because we certify for financial and government organizations. So nobody likes to have a supplier who owes taxes because then government can come after the contracts. So we do look at that, but you do not need to be a profitable business. We do not look at financial stability, and that is part of corporate and government risk assessment.
Yeah, I'll piggyback on that. Sorry, Derek, go ahead.
No, I was just gonna quickly add, yeah. So we're not looking at, you know, I mentioned that we need to see financials when you're in your application, but really a lot of that is to verify the ownership element, the ownership control management piece, which we can tell a lot from the financials. So we're not looking at the financial feasibility or viability of the business. And so that way, and also a question that comes up often is, you know, if they're a brand new business and say like less than a year old, then they may not have audited financials or stuff. You can certainly still apply and be eligible for certification. You know, I think but that's the role of our councils, is to work with those suppliers to see, are they actually ready for certification, or do they need to wait? But sorry, Cassandra, back to you.
Yeah, I'm just going to add to that, because the financial viability, I'm glad you mentioned that. But the other part of it, being an entrepreneur, being a business owner, as you well know, if you get a contract and you actually deliver on the contract, it might take a while for them to pay you. So for you to be financially solvent and have enough money to see yourself through that would be very important as a business owner. Because I mean, I know our corporates have been, during PPE time, during pandemic, they've been trying to reduce the payment cycle to pay quicker, but that's not obviously the case in all the corporates. So as a business owner, you got to be prepared to live through that as you go, as you get a contract.
Super, that's great. Okay, the last question I'll take is on intersectionality. Someone, a supplier in the audience, or an audience member, was wondering about if there's an integrated application process or discount fee. You know, how do you know if you, if you have affiliation with many of the councils? Like, how do you decide which one to certify, and how are you connected in some way, if you are?
Maybe I can start. I think, you know, the way the world is going, like intersectionality is definitely more like top of mind. And we see some suppliers that are part of multiple councils because they see the benefits of being part of, we're one big family, but we're also like a bunch of smaller families too. So they're getting benefits from being part of those smaller groups. I think like that's what I would say. I've more and more over the years, I've seen that the suppliers are seeing benefits to joining multiple councils.
One of the things that, and I'll be honest about, which is for me, it's been a little frustrating, is that right now under the current model of supplier diversity, it defines a diverse-owned businesses 51% within a specific constituency group. So, to be certified, you have to either be 51% women owned or LGBT owned, but there is that intersectionality doesn't really come into play. And so that's something that we and CAMSI have actually been looking at right now. Is there a way that we can, again, if we're trying to innovate and drive supply diversity while making sure that we're accessible to all businesses, is there a way that we can certify a business that may be 50% owned by Indigenous and 50% owned by somebody that identifies as LGBT. So those are some of the things that we're looking at right now. Nothing is unfortunately in place, but I think to add into, to respond to the question, one of the things that we do, if you are certified with one of the other councils, we will recognize that. And that just makes the process a little bit easier. Don't quote me. I think we may offer a discount if you are already certified with another council. We may offer that. But certainly it makes the certification process a little bit easier, knowing that one of my colleagues here around the table here have already done a big lift of that vetting. And so that just makes that a little bit easier for us.
And we also like to identify that selecting a council, we'd like, if you fit a number of them, join for sure, but we do things together that you can invite it as a member of the other council so you can come to that. And the other thing I always encourage entrepreneurs or businesses, look at the corporations that we support or work with and see where you're trying to do business. If they fit inside there, that's where you make your business plan. Start with there and then add to that as you go along.
Excellent. Super. Thank you very much. So first and foremost, I wanted to thank the audience for your participation, your questions, and for being here with us today, especially on a Friday afternoon. I hope you found this session to be informative. I'd also like to thank Wendy Suki for her research and insight into supplier diversity, as well as all the panelists for your continued advocacy and support for these underrepresented and underserviced communities. Finally, a big shout out to the WEKH Comms team, without whom this series would have never gotten off the ground. So thank you very much. We'd also like to hear back from you, your thoughts about today's discussion, which will help us serve you better in the future. A link to a follow-up survey will be posted in the chat and sent to you this afternoon via email. In addition, a recording of this webinar will be made available to all registered attendees, so feel free to share the link with colleagues who are not able to attend today. I also invite you to follow the Women Entrepreneurship Hub on Twitter, LinkedIn, Facebook, and Instagram, and to keep an eye out for our bi-weekly newsletters. Lastly, I wanted to let you know to stay informed for the next session on the procurement series, Building Resilient Communities, Social Enterprises, and Procurement, which will be held on Thursday, October 14th. Thank you everyone for joining us this afternoon, and please enjoy your weekend.
Take care.
Bye.
Bye.